Get out. The words hit Evangeline Whitmore like a slap across the face as she stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, her nursing bag clutched in white-knuckled hands. The man in the wheelchair didn't even look at her, his dark eyes fixed on the rain pelting the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Martha's Vineyard mansion. "Mr. Ravencrest, I said get out." Caspian Ravencrest's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, even from a wheelchair. His jaw was set in a hard line, stubble darkening his angular features. "I don't need another babysitter." Evangeline had dealt with difficult patients before, but none who radiated such cold fury. She stepped into the room anyway, setting her bag on the mahogany dresser. "I'm not a babysitter. I'm a registered nurse, and your sister hired me to—" "My sister?" He finally turned to face her, and she nearly stepped back at the intensity in his dark eyes. "Let me guess. Cordelia told you I was a poor, broken man who needed saving? She told me you needed medical care." A harsh laugh escaped him. "What I need is to be left alone." He wheeled his chair closer, and Evangeline caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker. Despair, maybe. "How much is she paying you?" "I'll double it to walk out that door right now." "I don't want your money. Everyone wants my money." His eyes raked over her simple navy dress, her sensible shoes, the cross pendant at her throat. "What are you, some kind of nun?" Heat crept up Evangeline's neck. "I was raised at St. Catherine's Home for Children in Vermont. I became a nurse to help people." "How noble." The sarcasm in his voice could have cut glass. "And you think you can help me? Fix me with your prayers and bedside manner?" Before she could answer, the bedroom door opened and Cordelia Ravencrest glided in, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Everything about Caspian's sister screamed money and power, from her perfectly styled blonde hair to her Chanel suit. "Caspian, I see you've met Evangeline." Cordelia's smile didn't reach her eyes as she looked between them. "I trust you're being welcoming. I was just explaining to Miss Whitmore that her services aren't needed. Your last 3 nurses might disagree." Cordelia moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked glass. "One lasted 2 days. The second made it a week before you threw a water pitcher at her head." She ducked. "And the third?" Caspian's jaw tightened. She couldn't handle the job. Evangeline watched the sibling exchange with growing unease. There was something beneath their words, a tension that had nothing to do with medical care. "Miss Whitmore comes highly recommended," Cordelia continued. "The agency assured me she's very dedicated to her patients." The way she said it made Evangeline's skin crawl, though she couldn't say why. "I don't care if she's Mother Teresa reincarnated." Caspian wheeled his chair to face his sister directly. "I don't want a nurse. I don't want your help. I want to be left alone." "That's not an option." For the first time, steel crept into Cordelia's voice. "The board is already questioning your ability to run the company. If they think you can't even take care of yourself, the board answers to me." "Do they?" Cordelia tilted her head. "When was the last time you attended a meeting? Reviewed a contract? Left this room?" Caspian's hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests so tightly his knuckles went white. Evangeline found herself holding her breath, sensing she was witnessing something private and dangerous. "Fine." The word came out like a curse. "But when she quits like all the others, don't come crying to me." "She won't quit." Cordelia's gaze slid to Evangeline. "Will you, Miss Whitmore?" Something in the woman's tone made Evangeline's stomach twist, but she lifted her chin. "I don't quit on my patients." "Excellent." Cordelia headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Evangeline, Caspian's medical files are in the study. Everything you need to know about his condition is in there." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "Everything." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Evangeline alone with a man who looked like he wanted to strangle someone with his bare hands. "Congratulations," Caspian said, his voice deadly quiet. "You just signed up for the worst job of your life." Thunder rumbled overhead, and Evangeline wondered what she'd gotten herself into. But she'd made a promise, and she intended to keep it, even if it killed her. Evangeline knocked on the bedroom door at 7 the next morning, armed with a breakfast tray and her most professional demeanor. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. "Mr. Ravencrest? I'm coming in." She found him exactly where she'd left him the night before, slumped in his wheelchair by the window, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Empty whiskey bottles littered the side table, and the air reeked of alcohol and unwashed skin. "Time for breakfast." She set the tray on the dresser, ignoring his glare. Time for you to leave. Not happening. Evangeline pulled open the heavy curtains, flooding the room with morning light. Caspian winced and turned away. When's the last time you showered? None of your damn business. She studied him, really looked at him for the first time. Beneath the stubble and the anger, she could see what he'd been before the accident. Strong jawline, intelligent eyes, broad shoulders that spoke of hours in the gym. But now his skin had a grayish pallor, and his hair hung limp and unwashed. You can do this the easy way or the hard way, she said, moving toward his wheelchair. What the hell does that mean? It means you're getting clean whether you cooperate or not. She gripped the handles of his chair. Bathroom. Now. Don't touch me. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You're my patient. Touching you is part of the job. She began pushing the wheelchair despite his protests. Unless you'd prefer Cordelia to find you like this when she comes by later? That stopped his struggles. They both knew his sister's visit wasn't a social call. It was an inspection. The master bathroom was larger than Evangeline's entire apartment back in Vermont, all marble and gold fixtures. She positioned his wheelchair beside the walk-in shower, then turned on the water to let it warm. I'm not undressing in front of you, Caspian said. You're not undressing yourself either, apparently. She knelt beside his chair, her fingers moving to the buttons of his wrinkled shirt. I'm a nurse, Mr. Ravencrest. I've seen it all before. His hand clamped down on her wrist, stopping her. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. Not fear, but something else entirely. Something she'd never felt before. Please, he said quietly, and for the first time, she heard something other than anger in his voice. Vulnerability. Pain. I'll be quick and professional, she promised, her voice softer now. Just let me help you. Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them in that moment. A recognition, maybe, or an understanding. Slowly, his grip on her wrist loosened. Evangeline had bathed countless patients in her 5 years as a nurse, but this felt different. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked the buttons free, revealing a chest that was still muscled despite months of inactivity. Scars crisscrossed his torso, surgical scars, she realized, from procedures following the accident. The water's ready, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Getting him into the shower required lifting and maneuvering his dead weight, and by the time she had him positioned on the shower bench, they were both breathing hard. Water cascaded over his shoulders, and she reached for the soap. I can, he started. No, you can't. But her tone was gentle now, not commanding. Just, let me. The warm water and soap transformed him. As she worked, careful and efficient, the tension in his shoulders began to ease. She shampooed his dark hair, her fingers massaging his scalp, and heard him make a sound that might have been relief. Better? She asked. He nodded, not trusting his voice. As she rinsed the soap from his hair, her hand accidentally brushed against his neck. He went completely still, and she felt him shiver under her touch, not from cold, but from something else entirely. Sorry, she whispered. Don't be. Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the steam from the shower. Evangeline's breath caught in her throat. She'd never felt anything like this. This pull, this need to comfort and be comforted. We should, she started, then forgot what she was going to say when his hand covered hers. Thank you, he said simply. Those two words, spoken with such quiet sincerity, nearly undid her. This was the man beneath the anger, broken, yes, but not beyond healing. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she wanted to be the one to help him find his way back. A sharp knock on the bathroom door shattered the moment. Caspian. Cordelia's voice carried through the wood. I heard voices. Is everything all right? Evangeline stepped back so quickly she nearly slipped on the wet tile. Fine, she called out, her voice higher than normal. Just finishing up. I'll wait in the study, Cordelia replied. We need to discuss some business matters. The spell was broken. Caspian's walls slammed back into place, his expression closing off once again. This doesn't change anything, he said as Evangeline helped him from the shower. But as she wrapped a towel around his shoulders, she caught him watching her in the mirror, and she knew he was lying. Everything had changed. Later, as she reviewed his medical files in the study, Evangeline found the first discrepancy. According to the neurosurgeon's notes, Caspian should have feeling in his legs, limited, but present. Yet when she'd asked him about sensation during the shower, he'd insisted he felt nothing below his waist. Someone was lying. But who? 3 weeks into her employment at the Ravencrest mansion, Evangeline had established a routine. Morning shower and shave for Caspian, physical therapy exercises he pretended to hate, meals he claimed to have no appetite for, and evening conversations that grew longer each night. She was changing his bedsheets when she noticed it, the way his left foot twitched when the fabric brushed against it. A quick, involuntary movement that contradicted everything in his medical file. "Did you feel that?" she asked, running her finger along his sole. "Feel what?" But his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Evangeline filed the observation away with the growing list of inconsistencies she'd noticed. The way he sometimes caught himself before his foot slipped off the wheelchair's footrest. How he favored his left leg when transferring to his bed. Small things that individually meant nothing, but together painted a troubling picture. "Your sister wants to see you," she said, smoothing the fresh sheets. "Something about quarterly reports." Caspian's expression darkened. "Tell her I'm busy." "Busy doing what? Staring out the window?" He shot her a look that would have withered most people, but Evangeline had grown immune to his glares. If anything, she found his rare moments of vulnerability far more dangerous to her peace of mind. "Maybe I should be there when you meet with her," she suggested. "As your nurse, I mean. To monitor your stress levels." "Absolutely not." The response was immediate and sharp. "Cordelia and I need to discuss business matters. Private matters." Before Evangeline could respond, a crash echoed through the mansion, followed by a string of creative curses. She rushed toward the sound, finding Mrs. Patterson, the elderly housekeeper, lying at the bottom of the main staircase. The wooden railing hung at an odd angle, clearly broken. "What happened?" Evangeline knelt beside the woman, checking for injuries. "The railing just gave way," Mrs. Patterson gasped, clutching her wrist. "I was polishing it like I have every week for 30 years, and it just snapped." Evangeline examined the break while they waited for the ambulance. The wood hadn't splintered naturally. It looked like it had been deliberately weakened, then painted over to hide the damage. "Probably termites," Cordelia said when she arrived, her face a mask of concern. "This old house has so many problems. We should have Mrs. Patterson checked at the hospital, just to be safe." As the paramedics loaded the housekeeper into the ambulance, Evangeline caught sight of a man in an expensive suit watching from across the street. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away and disappeared around the corner. "Who was that?" she asked Cordelia. "Who was what?" "The man watching the house." Cordelia followed her gaze to the empty sidewalk. "I don't see anyone. You're probably just shaken up from the accident." But Evangeline knew what she'd seen, and she was beginning to suspect that Mrs. Patterson's fall wasn't an accident at all. That evening, she found Caspian on the mansion's terrace, having somehow navigated his wheelchair down the ramp that led outside. The sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said, joining him at the railing. A different railing, she noted, one that looked much sturdier than the one that had nearly killed Mrs. Patterson. "I needed air." He didn't look at her, but she saw his hands gripping the wheelchair's armrests. "Is Mrs. Patterson all right?" "Broken wrist, some bruises. She'll recover." Evangeline studied his profile in the dying light. "Caspian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Now he did look at her, wariness creeping into his expression. "What?" "The accident that put you in this chair. Tell me exactly what happened." His face went carefully blank. "I was driving too fast in the rain. Lost control. Flipped the car." "Where?" "What does it matter?" "Where?" she pressed. "Route 1, heading back from Boston." The words came out clipped, rehearsed. "Single car accident. No other vehicles involved." Evangeline nodded, filing away another piece of the puzzle. "And you remember everything clearly?" "Every detail." His voice was bitter. "Trust me, I've replayed it enough times." She wanted to ask more, but the pain in his voice stopped her. Instead, she did something that surprised them both. She reached out and covered his hand with hers. "I'm sorry," she said simply, "for what happened to you, for what you've lost." He stared down at their joined hands, and she felt the tension in his fingers ease slightly. "Most people tell me I should be grateful to be alive. Most people are idiots." That startled a laugh out of him, the first genuine laugh she'd heard since arriving. The sound transformed his face, giving her a glimpse of the man he'd been before grief and isolation had carved their marks into his features. "You're different," he said quietly. "Different how?" "Different from the others. The nurses Cordelia hired before you." His thumb moved across her knuckles, a barely there caress that sent heat racing up her arm. "They all wanted to fix me. You just want to understand me." The simple observation hit closer to home than she cared to admit. She had always been drawn to broken things, wounded birds, abandoned kittens, lost causes. But this felt different, deeper. "Maybe understanding comes first," she said. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled around them, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below providing a soothing backdrop. Evangeline found herself studying the play of moonlight across Caspian's features, noting the way his lips curved slightly when he was lost in thought. "I should get you inside," she said finally. "The evening air isn't good for don't." His hand tightened on hers. "Don't treat me like an invalid. Not now." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. "I don't see you as an invalid." "No." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "What do you see?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Evangeline knew she should deflect, maintain professional boundaries, but something about the way he was looking at her made honesty feel like the only option. "I see a man who's stronger than he realizes," she said softly. "A man who's been hurt, but who's still fighting. A man who deserves better than isolation and self-pity." "Self-pity?" One eyebrow arched upward. "Yes." She met his gaze steadily. "You're so busy being angry at the world that you've forgotten you're still part of it." For a moment, she thought she'd gone too far. His expression went hard, and she braced herself for another verbal assault. Instead, he surprised her. "You terrify me," he said quietly. "Why?" "Because you make me want things I thought I'd given up on." His voice was barely above a whisper. "And that's dangerous for both of us." Before she could ask what he meant, the terrace lights flickered on, flooding the space with harsh illumination. Cordelia stood in the doorway, her smile sharp as broken glass. "There you are," she said, her gaze taking in their joined hands before they quickly separated. "I've been looking everywhere for you, Caspian. We really do need to discuss those quarterly reports." "Tomorrow," Caspian said without taking his eyes off Evangeline. "I'm afraid it can't wait." Cordelia's tone brooked no argument. "The board meeting is Monday, and there are some discrepancies that need your immediate attention." Evangeline saw something flicker across Caspian's face. Fear, maybe, or resignation. Whatever was in those reports, it was serious enough to break through his usual defiance. "Fine." He reached for his wheelchair's controls. "But make it quick." As Cordelia wheeled him inside, she paused beside Evangeline. "A word of advice," she said, her voice honey-sweet with an undertone of steel. "My brother has been through enough trauma. The last thing he needs is complications." The warning was crystal clear, but Evangeline lifted her chin. "I'm here to help him heal." "Are you?" Cordelia's smile never wavered. "How noble. Just remember, some wounds are better left alone." Later that night, as Evangeline lay in her small bedroom on the mansion's third floor, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. The broken railing, the mysterious man watching the house, Cordelia's veiled threats. None of it felt like coincidence. And then there was Caspian himself, a puzzle wrapped in anger and pain. The way he'd looked at her on the terrace, the raw need in his voice when he'd said she terrified him. It had awakened something in her that she'd never felt before. Something that had nothing to do with nursing and everything to do with the electric current that seemed to run between them whenever they touched. She was still thinking about the warmth of his hand covering hers when sleep finally claimed her. She never heard the soft footsteps in the hallway outside her door, or the quiet click of someone testing her door handle in the darkness. Evangeline woke to the acrid smell of smoke. She bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as wisps of gray smoke curled under her bedroom door. The hallway was thick with it, but she could see the orange glow coming from the direction of the main staircase. She grabbed her robe and rushed toward Caspian's room, coughing as the smoke burned her lungs. His door was closed, and when she tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. Locked from the inside, or jammed. "Caspian." She pounded on the heavy wood. "Caspian, wake up." No response. Terror clawed at her throat as she threw her shoulder against the door. It gave slightly, but something was blocking it from the other side. The smoke was getting thicker, and she could hear the hungry crackle of flames somewhere below. Think, Evangeline. Think. She ran to the balcony adjoining her room. If she could get to his balcony, maybe she could break through those doors. The ledge was narrow, barely wide enough for her feet, and 3 stories above the rocky shoreline. One wrong step would mean certain death. But Caspian was trapped. She swung her leg over the railing, her bare feet finding purchase on the cold stone. Don't look down. Just don't look down. Step by step, she inched along the ledge, her fingers clinging to whatever handholds she could find in the old masonry. When she reached his balcony, she nearly sobbed with relief. The French doors were unlocked. She stumbled inside to find Caspian unconscious in his bed, his breathing shallow. A heavy armoire had been pushed against his bedroom door, definitely not something that had fallen on its own. Caspian. She shook his shoulders. His skin was pale and clammy, his pulse thready. Wake up. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Evangeline? What? Fire. We need to get out now. She was already moving toward his wheelchair, but he caught her wrist. The smoke, he said, his voice hoarse. It's not just from fire. Someone drugged the ventilation system. The words hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't an accident. It was attempted murder. Can you walk? She asked urgently. He struggled to sit up, his face a mask of concentration and pain. I don't know. Everything feels wrong. Try. She pulled his arm across her shoulders, supporting his weight as he swung his legs over the side of the bed. Come on, we're going to the balcony. He managed 3 unsteady steps before his legs gave out completely. As she caught him, preventing his fall, she felt the muscles in his thighs tense and release. These weren't the dead limbs of a paraplegic. They were weak from disuse, but very much alive. You can feel them, she said, the realization hitting her like lightning. You can feel your legs. Their eyes met, and she saw the truth there. Pain, shame, and something that looked like relief at finally being discovered. It's complicated, he whispered. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone had called the fire department, or maybe the flames had triggered an automatic alarm. Either way, help was coming. We'll figure it out later, she said, helping him into his wheelchair. Right now we need to get out of here. The balcony was their only escape route. The fire had spread to the main staircase, and she could hear windows exploding somewhere on the first floor. She positioned his wheelchair as close to the railing as possible. This is insane, Caspian said, but he was already gripping the chair's armrests in preparation. Trust me. She climbed over the railing first, then helped guide him as he transferred his weight from the chair to the ledge. His arms were strong from months of wheelchair use, and he managed the transition better than she'd expected. The journey back along the ledge was a nightmare. Caspian's legs might have some feeling, but they weren't strong enough to support his full weight. She had to help him inch along, both of them pressed against the mansion's stone facade, while smoke poured from the windows below and the sound of sirens grew deafening. They made it to her balcony just as the fire trucks arrived. Evangeline collapsed onto the stone floor, pulling Caspian down beside her, both of them gasping for clean air. That was incredibly stupid, he said, his head falling back against the railing. That was incredibly brave, she corrected, studying his face in the glow of the emergency lights below. Someone tried to kill us tonight. Us. He turned to look at her. Why would anyone want to hurt you? Before she could answer, Cordelia appeared in her doorway, her hair perfect despite the chaos, her silk nightgown pristine. Thank God you're both safe, she said, but her eyes were cold as winter seas. I was so worried when I couldn't find you. Where were you when the fire started? Evangeline asked. In the guest house, reviewing some contracts. I smelled smoke and called 911 immediately. Cordelia's gaze shifted to Caspian. Are you hurt? I'm fine. But his voice carried an undertone that Evangeline was beginning to recognize, the careful control of someone who suspected but couldn't prove. The fire chief appeared behind Cordelia, his face grim beneath his helmet. The good news is we've contained the blaze to the main staircase and part of the first floor. The bad news is this was definitely arson. Someone doused the stairs with accelerant. Arson? Cordelia's hand flew to her throat. But who would do such a thing? That's what we intend to find out, ma'am. We'll need to speak with everyone who was in the house tonight. As the questions began, Evangeline noticed Caspian growing paler. The adrenaline was wearing off, and whatever had been used to drug the ventilation system was still affecting him. She helped him to her bed, ignoring Cordelia's sharp look. "I need to examine him," she told the fire chief. "He may have been poisoned." It took 3 hours to give statements, submit to basic medical checks, and wait for the fire department to declare the mansion safe for limited occupancy. By the time the emergency crews left, dawn was breaking over Martha's vineyard, turning the smoke-stained sky pale gold. Evangeline finally had Caspian alone in her small bedroom. He was sitting on the edge of her bed, looking exhausted but alert. The color had returned to his cheeks, and his breathing was normal. "Now," she said, closing the door and leaning against it. "Tell me the truth about your legs." He was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse to answer. Then he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I started getting feeling back about 6 months ago," he said quietly. "Tingling at first, then actual sensation. My physical therapist said it was a miracle. Sometimes the spinal cord can heal itself, especially if the initial damage wasn't complete." "But you didn't tell anyone." "I told Cordelia." His laugh was bitter. "She said I was imagining things. That hope was making me delusional. She increased my pain medication and fired the physical therapist." Evangeline felt sick. "She's been keeping you drugged?" "Not drugged exactly, but the medication she insists I take makes everything fuzzy. Makes it hard to think clearly or trust my own perceptions." He looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with a pain that had nothing to do with physical injury. "I started pretending I couldn't feel anything because it was easier than fighting her about it. Why would she want to keep you in that chair? Think about it. As long as I'm seen as incapacitated, she has complete control of Ravencrest Industries. The board trusts her to make decisions in my best interest. If I suddenly recovered, she'd lose everything." The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. "Caspian, I think she's been trying to kill you. The accidents, the fire tonight, I know." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I've suspected for months, but I couldn't prove anything. And honestly, part of me didn't care. After the accident, after losing my fiancé and my best friend in that car." "Wait." Evangeline's blood ran cold. "You said it was a single-car accident. No other vehicles involved." The color drained from Caspian's face. "I did say that, didn't I?" He looked at her with something like wonder. "You remember everything. Who else was in the car?" "Rebecca, my fiancé, and Marcus, my best friend and business partner." His voice cracked. "They were driving back from our engagement party in Boston. I was supposed to be with them, but I'd had too much to drink. Cordelia insisted on driving me home separately." "Cordelia was there that night?" "She organized the whole party. Said she wanted to celebrate our engagement properly." He scrubbed his hands over his face. "She saved my life by insisting I ride with her. Or so I thought." Evangeline felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "What if she didn't save your life? What if she separated you from the others so you'd survive while they died?" He finished the thought she couldn't voice. "Jesus, you think she murdered them?" "I think someone's been trying to kill you for months, and tonight they almost succeeded. If you hadn't woken up when you did, if you hadn't risked your life to save me." He stood up, took a step toward her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he wasn't hiding his ability to walk. "Why? Why would you do that?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to face. Evangeline looked at this man who had somehow become the center of her world in just a few weeks, and knew she was in dangerous territory. "Because," she said simply, "I couldn't lose you." Something shifted in his expression, a wall crumbling that had been years in the building. When he stepped closer, she didn't back away. "Evangeline." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "What are you doing to me?" Before she could answer, his hands cupped her face and his mouth found hers. The kiss was desperate, hungry, filled with all the need and longing they'd been dancing around for weeks. She had never been kissed before, never felt the devastating sweetness of someone's lips moving against hers with such tender urgency. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "We should be careful," she whispered against his lips. "Probably." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "But I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of pretending I don't want you." The admission sent heat spiraling through her, but before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside her door. Heavy footsteps that didn't belong to Cordelia. Caspian was back in his wheelchair so fast it made her head spin, his expression once again carefully blank. When the knock came, Evangeline smoothed her hair and opened the door to find a man in an expensive suit. The same man she'd seen watching the house the day Mrs. Patterson fell. Miss Whitmore. His smile was cold and professional. I'm Maximus Thorne, private investigator. Mrs. Ravencrest hired me to look into the recent accidents around the property. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions. Evangeline's blood turned to ice. She was looking at the face of the enemy, and he was standing in her doorway with a predator's smile. Of course, she managed. I'm happy to help. But as Maximus Thorne stepped into her room, his pale eyes cataloging every detail, she wondered if she'd just signed her own death warrant. Maximus Thorne circled Evangeline's small bedroom like a shark sensing blood in the water. His pale eyes missed nothing. The rumpled bed where she and Caspian had been sitting, the lingering scent of smoke in the air, the way Caspian's hands gripped his wheelchair with white-knuckled intensity. Terrible business, this fire, Maximus said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. You're very fortunate to have escaped. Both of you. We're grateful to be alive, Evangeline replied carefully. I'm sure you are. His smile never reached his eyes. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, have you noticed anything unusual since you began working here? Any strange occurrences, unexpected visitors, that sort of thing? Evangeline felt Caspian's gaze burning into her, a silent warning to be cautious. Just the accident with Mrs. Patterson and now this fire. Why? Do you think they're connected? Everything is connected, Miss Whitmore. That's the first rule of investigation. Maximus pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages. I've been looking into your background. Very interesting reading. Her blood turned to ice. My background. St. Catherine's Home for Children in Vermont. 26 years old, no family, no close friends. You've lived a very isolated life, haven't you? I don't see how that's relevant. Oh, but it is. Maximus stepped closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, cigarettes, and something metallic that made her think of blood. You see, people with no connections, no one to miss them if they disappeared. Well, they make very convenient targets. Caspian's wheelchair suddenly moved forward, placing him between Evangeline and the investigator. That's enough. If you have questions about the fire, ask them. Otherwise, get out. Mr. Ravencrest. Maximus's attention shifted to Caspian with predatory focus. How are you feeling? That was quite an ordeal for someone in your condition. I'm fine. Are you? You look remarkably alert for someone who was nearly overcome by smoke inhalation. Almost as if you're in better health than your medical records indicate. The threat in his words was barely veiled. Evangeline watched the silent battle of wills between the two men and realized with growing horror that Maximus knew about Caspian's recovery. Somehow, he knew everything. I think you should leave, she said, moving to stand beside Caspian's chair. If Mrs. Ravencrest wants to speak with us, she can arrange a proper meeting. Oh, but Mrs. Ravencrest is the one who suggested I speak with you personally. Maximus tucked his notebook back into his jacket. She's quite concerned about your welfare, Miss Whitmore. In fact, she mentioned that you've been asking a lot of questions about Mr. Ravencrest's medical files. Evangeline's mouth went dry. I'm his nurse. Of course I review his medical information. Of course, but perhaps you've discovered some discrepancies? Things that don't quite add up? Before she could respond, he was moving toward the door with fluid grace. I'll be in touch, Miss Whitmore. Very soon, I suspect. The moment he left, Caspian was out of his wheelchair and crossing to the window, moving with more strength and coordination than she'd seen from him yet. He's gone, he said, watching through the glass. For now. Caspian, what's happening? Who is that man really? He turned to face her, his expression grim. I don't know, but he's not a private investigator. At least, not the kind who works for insurance companies and cheating spouses. He ran a hand through his hair. We need to get out of here. Tonight. Run? But where would we go? I have a safe house in Bar Harbor. Rebecca and I bought it as a weekend retreat before. He trailed off, pain flickering across his features. Cordelia doesn't know about it. We can figure out our next move from there. Evangeline's mind was racing. If we disappear, won't that prove we're guilty of something? If we stay, we might not live long enough to prove our innocence. He moved to her dresser, pulling out clothes and shoving them into her nursing bag. Pack light. Only essentials. As she gathered her few belongings, a terrible thought occurred to her. Caspian, the night Rebecca and Marcus died, you said Cordelia organized the engagement party? Yes. She insisted on handling all the arrangements. Said she wanted it to be perfect. He paused in his packing. Why? Who suggested the route they took home? His face went ashen. She did. Said it was more scenic, less traffic. The implications hit him like physical blows. Oh God. She planned it all. The party, the route, making sure I wasn't in the car. She needed them dead, Evangeline said quietly. But she needed you alive and controllable. Marcus was my business partner. He had access to all the company accounts, knew where every penny was invested. If he'd discovered what Cordelia was doing, Caspian sank into a chair, the weight of understanding crushing him. She killed them to protect her embezzlement, and she's been keeping me drugged and helpless so I couldn't investigate. But now you're getting better. Now you're a threat. And you're helping me recover, which makes you a threat too. He looked up at her with desperate eyes. I'm so sorry, Evangeline. I never meant for you to get caught up in this. Before she could respond, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in an eerie red glow. But in those few seconds of absolute darkness, Evangeline had heard something that made her blood freeze, the soft whisper of footsteps in the hallway outside her door. Caspian heard it too. He was already moving, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the balcony doors. They're coming. Who? Does it matter? He was stuffing essential items into her bag with efficient speed. We leave now, or we don't leave at all. They slipped onto the balcony just as she heard her door handle turning. The night air was cold against her skin, but fear kept her moving. Caspian had rigged a rope from her balcony to a tree 20 feet away. When had he done that? Ladies first, he whispered. I can't. I'm afraid of heights. You climbed along that ledge to save my life. You can do this. His hands framed her face in the darkness. Trust me. She trusted him. More than that, she was falling in love with him, though she barely understood what that meant. All she knew was that the thought of losing him made her chest tight with panic. The rope held her weight as she rappelled down to the tree, her nursing bag slung across her shoulders. Caspian followed with surprising agility, his legs clearly stronger than he'd been pretending even to her. They dropped the final 10 feet to the ground just as lights appeared in her bedroom window. This way, he led her through the gardens toward a gate hidden behind overgrown hedges. I have a car stashed about half a mile down the road. They were halfway across the property when floodlights suddenly blazed to life, turning night into harsh day. Shouts erupted from the mansion behind them, and Evangeline heard the unmistakable sound of dogs barking. Run, Caspian said. They ran through the estate grounds like deer fleeing hunters, crashing through undergrowth and leaping over low stone walls. Evangeline's lungs burned and her legs ached, but terror kept her moving. Behind them, the dogs were getting closer. The hidden car was an old BMW, battered but reliable looking. Caspian had the engine running in seconds. Where did you learn to do all this? She gasped as they pulled away from the estate. You pick things up when you suspect your sister is trying to kill you. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I've been planning this escape for months. I just never thought I'd have to use it. They drove in tense silence for 20 minutes before he was satisfied they weren't being followed. Only then did Evangeline allow herself to think about what they'd discovered. She killed them, she said quietly. Your fiancé and your friend. She murdered them in cold blood. And she would have killed me too, if she could have found a way to do it without losing control of the company. His voice was flat, emotionless. She needed me alive, but helpless. The perfect puppet. What do we do now? We find proof. Real evidence that will hold up in court. He glanced at her in the dim light from the dashboard. But first, we need to figure out who else is involved. Maximus Thorne isn't working alone. As if summoned by his words, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. A large black sedan, following at precisely their speed. Hold on, Caspian said, pressing harder on the accelerator. The chase that followed was like something out of a nightmare. The sedan matched their every move, drawing closer with each turn. When Caspian took a sharp right onto a narrow coastal road, the other car was less than 50 feet behind. They're going to ram us, Evangeline said, watching the sedan close the distance. Not if I can help it. Caspian downshifted and took a hairpin turn at dangerous speed. The BMW's tires screamed against the asphalt, but they held the road. The sedan wasn't so lucky. Evangeline watched in the side mirror as it skidded wide on the turn, smashed through a guardrail, and plunged down the rocky embankment toward the ocean below. They sat in stunned silence for a moment, the only sound their ragged breathing and the tick of the cooling engine. "Is it over?" she whispered. "No." Caspian's voice was grim. "This is just the beginning. Cordelia won't stop until we're both dead. And now she knows we're fighting back." He reached across the console and took her hand, his fingers warm and steady against hers. "I'm sorry, Evangeline. I'm sorry I dragged you into this nightmare." She looked at his profile in the moonlight, strong jaw set with determination, dark eyes focused on the road ahead, shoulders squared against whatever was coming. This man had awakened something in her she hadn't known existed. Not just desire, though she felt that too, but a fierce protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. "I'm not sorry," she said quietly. "Whatever happens next, I'm not sorry." When he smiled at her in the darkness, she knew she would follow him anywhere, even into hell itself. And given what they were up against, that's exactly where they might be heading. The safe house in Bar Harbor was a modest cottage tucked between towering pine trees, invisible from the main road. As Caspian led her up the porch steps, Evangeline noticed his limp was almost completely gone. The man who had been confined to a wheelchair just hours ago was moving with increasing strength and confidence. "How long have you been able to walk like this?" she asked as he unlocked the front door. "The improvement has been gradual over the past few months. But tonight, with the adrenaline." He paused, flexing his fingers. "It's like my body remembered what it was supposed to do." Inside, the cottage was cozy but clearly hadn't been used in months. Dust covers draped the furniture like ghosts, and the air smelled stale and closed. Caspian pulled the covers away to reveal comfortable furniture and personal touches that spoke of happier times: framed photos, books, a wine rack stocked with expensive bottles. Evangeline picked up one of the photos, studying the faces of 3 young people laughing on a boat deck. Caspian looked younger, happier, his arm around a stunning blonde woman. The third person was a handsome man with kind eyes and an easy smile. "Rebecca and Marcus," Caspian said quietly, appearing beside her. "She was beautiful. She was everything to me. Or so I thought." His voice carried a note of something she couldn't identify. Guilt, maybe, or confusion. "We'd been together since college. Everyone said we were perfect for each other." Evangeline set the photo down carefully. "What changed?" "Nothing. That was the problem." He moved to the window, peering out through the curtains. "I loved her, but I wasn't in love with her. Not the way I should have been. Not the way." He trailed off, but his eyes found hers across the room. The implication hung between them like a live wire. Evangeline felt heat creep up her neck, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number," she said, showing him the screen. The message was simple and chilling. "You can't run forever. Come home, and we can discuss this like civilized people." "See, she found us already." Evangeline's voice was barely a whisper. "Impossible. This place isn't in my name, and I paid cash. There's no paper trail." But Caspian was already moving, checking locks and windows. "Unless..." He stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. "Your phone. They could be tracking your phone." Evangeline stared at the device in her hand as if it had turned into a snake. "But how would they have my number linked to tracking?" "Cordelia hired you through an agency. She would have all your information." Caspian took the phone and pulled out the battery. "We need to assume they know exactly where we are. So what do? We go on the offensive." His expression hardened with resolve. "I'm tired of running from my own sister. It's time she answered for what she's done." Before Evangeline could ask what he meant, headlights swept across the cottage windows. Not one car, but several. The vehicles moved with military precision, surrounding the building in a matter of seconds. "Too late," Caspian muttered, then louder, "Upstairs. Now." They raced up the narrow staircase to the cottage's second floor just as the front door exploded inward. Heavy footsteps thundered across the hardwood below, and she heard Maximus Thorne's voice directing his men. "Check every room. They're here somewhere." Caspian led her to a bedroom at the back of the house, then pushed aside a bookshelf to reveal a hidden panel in the wall. "Service tunnel," he explained. "It leads to the old root cellar and then to the woods." "You've really thought of everything." "I had a lot of time to plan while I was pretending to be helpless." He helped her through the narrow opening. Go. I'll be right behind you. But as she started into the tunnel, she heard him moving back toward the bedroom door instead of following her. Caspian, what are you doing? Buying us time. He pulled a gun from a hidden compartment in the nightstand. When had he stashed that there? Keep going. If something happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you. She grabbed his arm, surprised by her own fierceness. We stick together. That's how this works. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. Then footsteps pounded up the stairs, and the decision was made for them. They both dove into the tunnel just as the bedroom door burst open. The tunnel was cramped and dark, barely wide enough for their shoulders. Evangeline crawled forward on her hands and knees, trying not to think about spiders or rats or the fact that men with guns were searching for them just feet above. Behind her, she could hear Caspian's steady breathing and the occasional muffled curse when his injured back protested the confined space. They emerged in the old root cellar, a stone-walled chamber that smelled of earth and decay. A set of wooden steps led up to storm doors that opened into the forest behind the cottage. Caspian went first, easing the doors open just enough to peer outside. Clear, he whispered. They slipped out into the pine-scented darkness, but they'd barely made it 20 yards into the trees when shouts erupted behind them. Flashlight beams swept through the forest like deadly fingers, searching. This way, Caspian led her deeper into the woods, moving with surprising stealth for someone who'd been wheelchair-bound for 2 years. His body was remembering old skills, old training she knew nothing about. They came to a small clearing where moonlight filtered through the canopy above. In the center sat an old pickup truck hidden under a camouflage tarp. Another contingency plan? She asked. The last one, I hope. He pulled away the tarp and helped her into the passenger seat. The engine turned over on the first try, purring with well-maintained reliability. As they pulled away from the cottage, Evangeline saw the flames starting to lick at the windows. Maximus and his men were destroying the evidence of their presence, just as they'd tried to do at the mansion. Where to now? She asked. Boston. I have something there that Cordelia doesn't know about. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. A safe deposit box with copies of all the original company financial records. If I'm right about what she's been doing, the evidence is all there. They drove through the night in tense silence, taking back roads and avoiding highways where they might be spotted. Evangeline found herself studying Caspian's profile in the dashboard lights, marveling at the transformation she was witnessing. This wasn't the broken man she'd found in that wheelchair. This was someone else entirely. Someone dangerous and capable and utterly determined. Who are you really? She asked quietly. He glanced at her. What do you mean? The guns, the escape routes, the way you move now that you're not pretending to be paralyzed. You're not just a businessman, are you? A long pause. Then, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan before I took over the company. Special forces. Some skills you never lose, even when you're trying to forget them. That explains so much, his tactical thinking, his ability to stay calm under pressure, the way he'd handled their escape. But it also raised new questions. Why didn't you use those skills before? When you suspected Cordelia was trying to hurt you? Because I wasn't sure. And because... He hesitated, then continued. Because part of me felt like I deserved it. Rebecca and Marcus died because I was too drunk to drive myself home. If I'd been in that car with them, you'd be dead too, and Cordelia would have complete control of your company. Evangeline reached across the console to touch his arm. Their deaths weren't your fault. They were murdered by someone who saw them as obstacles to her greed. I know that. In my head, I know that. His voice was rough with emotion. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. They were approaching the outskirts of Boston when Caspian's phone rang. He'd been using a prepaid cell he'd hidden in the truck, but somehow Cordelia had gotten this number too. Answer it, Evangeline said. Let's hear what she has to say. Caspian hit the speaker button. Hello, Cordelia. Oh, thank God. His sister's voice was honey-sweet with false relief. I've been so worried about you. When I found your room empty and signs of a struggle, cut the act. We know what you've been doing. A pause. When Cordelia spoke again, the mask had slipped. Do you? And what exactly do you think you know, little brother? I know you've been embezzling from the company for years. I know you murdered Rebecca and Marcus to cover it up. And I know you've been keeping me drugged and helpless so I couldn't investigate. Prove it. The words were sharp as broken glass. I intend to. With what evidence? Your paranoid delusions? The ravings of a man who's been mentally unstable since his accident? Cordelia's laugh was cold. Who do you think the police will believe? A respected businesswoman who's been caring for her disabled brother? Or a man who's clearly having a psychotic break and has kidnapped his nurse? Evangeline felt ice settle in her stomach. Kidnapped? Oh yes, Miss Whitmore. I've already filed a report. You're considered a victim in all this, of course. Taken against your will by a dangerous, unstable man. The false sympathy in Cordelia's voice was nauseating. But don't worry. When this is all over, I'll make sure you're well compensated for your trauma. You're insane, Caspian said. I'm practical. You were always too idealistic, too emotional. That's why you could never run this company properly. The venom in her voice was unmistakable now. Rebecca saw it too, you know. She was planning to leave you. You're lying. Am I? Ask yourself why she was so eager to go to that party without you. Why she insisted on driving with Marcus instead of waiting for you to sober up. Cordelia's words were surgical strikes, designed to cause maximum damage. She was tired of your drinking, your guilt, your inability to commit fully to anything. She confided in me, you know, told me she was having second thoughts about the engagement. Evangeline watched Caspian's face go white, saw the doubt creeping into his eyes. Whatever games Cordelia was playing, she knew exactly where to strike to cause the most pain. Even if that's true, Evangeline said, taking the phone from Caspian's numb fingers, it doesn't justify murder. Oh, but Miss Whitmore, you don't understand the whole situation. Cordelia's attention shifted to her like a predator focusing on new prey. You see, I know who you really are. I know why you were at that orphanage, and I know why your mother had to disappear. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What are you talking about? Your mother worked for our family, dear. 27 years ago. She was a nurse, just like you. And just like you, she started asking too many questions. Evangeline's breath caught in her throat. My mother is dead. Is she? According to the orphanage records, your mother abandoned you when you were 6 months old. No death certificate, no grave, no body ever found. Cordelia's voice was silk over steel. What do you think happened to her, Evangeline? Where do you think she went? Stop. The word came out as a broken whisper. I hired you specifically because of who you are. I wanted to see if you'd inherited your mother's curiosity. And you have. Unfortunately, that means you've also inherited her fate. The line went dead. Caspian pulled the truck over to the side of the road, his hands shaking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry she dragged you into this. But Evangeline was staring out the windshield, her mind reeling. Her mother had been a nurse. Her mother had worked for the Ravencrest family. Her mother had asked questions and then disappeared. She killed her, she said quietly. Cordelia killed my mother. We don't know that for sure. Yes, we do. She turned to look at him, and he saw something new in her eyes. Not just determination, but cold, focused rage. And now we're going to make her pay for it. The scared, sheltered woman who'd arrived at the mansion a month ago was gone. In her place sat someone harder, someone who'd been forged in fire and betrayal and the terrible knowledge of what evil could hide behind a beautiful face. Together? Caspian asked. Together. She reached for his hand, and when their fingers intertwined, it felt like a pact sealed in blood. But first, we get that evidence. And then we end this. As they pulled back onto the highway toward Boston, neither of them saw the black sedan that fell into position half a mile behind them, following at a discreet distance. The final confrontation was coming, and Cordelia Ravencrest was ready for it. The Boston First National Bank stood like a fortress against the pre-dawn sky, its granite facade imposing even in the empty financial district. Caspian had timed their arrival perfectly, early enough to avoid crowds, late enough for the bank to be open for business customers. Safety Deposit Box 847, he told the bank manager, producing identification and a key from his wallet. I need to access it immediately. The manager, a thin man with nervous eyes, kept glancing between them as if expecting trouble. Of course, Mr. Ravencrest. Right this way. In the sterile vault room, surrounded by rows of gleaming metal boxes, Caspian opened the deposit box with steady hands. Inside were thick manila folders, computer disks, and something that made Evangeline's heart skip, a smaller metal box with her mother's name engraved on it. Isadora Whitmore, she whispered, tracing the letters with her finger. Your mother left this with me before she disappeared. Caspian said quietly. She made me promise to keep it safe, said someday her daughter might need it. You knew her? I was 6 years old. She used to bring me cookies when I was sick, told me stories about brave knights and beautiful princesses. His voice was thick with memory. She was kind to a lonely little boy whose parents were too busy making money to notice him. With trembling hands, Evangeline opened the box. Inside was a letter, a photograph, and a small gold locket. The photograph showed a young woman with Evangeline's dark hair and gentle eyes, holding a baby. On the back, someone had written, Evangeline Rose Whitmore, 6 months old. The letter was addressed to her. My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened and I am gone. Cordelia Ravencrest has discovered what I found in the company files, evidence of massive embezzlement, money stolen from employee pension funds and charity donations. I tried to do the right thing, tried to report it, but she has powerful friends. She threatened to hurt you if I spoke out. I'm leaving you with people who will keep you safe, and I pray someday you'll understand why I had to disappear. The evidence is hidden where she'll never think to look, inside the binding of your childhood Bible. I love you always. Mama. Evangeline's hands shook as she read. She didn't abandon me. She was trying to protect me. And she did. Caspian pulled financial documents from the folders. These records show everything: shell companies, offshore accounts, fraudulent transactions going back 15 years. Cordelia's been stealing millions. A slow clap echoed through the vault room. They spun to find Cordelia standing in the doorway, flanked by Maximus Thorne and 2 other men. She was perfectly dressed as always, but her smile was razor-sharp. How touching. A family reunion of sorts. She stepped into the room, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Though technically, Evangeline, we're the ones who are family. What are you talking about? Your mother didn't just work for us, dear. She was my father's mistress. His little side project. Cordelia's laugh was crystalline and cruel. Which makes you my half-sister. Isn't that delicious? The words hit like physical blows. Evangeline staggered backward, her mind reeling. You're lying. Am I? Look in that locket, sweetheart. You'll find a photo of dear old Dad. With numb fingers, Evangeline opened the locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of a distinguished older man, the same man whose painting hung in the Ravencrest Mansion's main hall. He kept your mother as his pet for years, Cordelia continued conversationally. Promised her he'd leave my mother, marry her, legitimize you. But when it came time to choose between his empire and his plaything, well, she shrugged. Family money won. So you killed her. Evangeline's voice was deadly quiet. I eliminated a threat to the family reputation, just like I eliminated Rebecca and Marcus when they got too close to the truth. Cordelia examined her manicured nails. And just like I'm going to eliminate both of you. Maximus stepped forward, his hand moving to his jacket. But Caspian was faster. His military training kicked in as he lunged forward, tackling the larger man to the ground. They rolled across the vault floor, fighting for control of Maximus's gun. Run! Caspian shouted to Evangeline. But she couldn't leave him. Instead, she grabbed a heavy metal box from a nearby shelf and brought it down on one of Cordelia's men as he tried to help Maximus. The man dropped like a stone. The gun went off. The sound was deafening in the confined space. For a terrifying moment, both men lay still. Then Caspian rolled away, blood seeping through his shirt, but very much alive. Maximus wasn't moving. You always were too sentimental, Cordelia said, pulling a small pistol from her purse. Just like our father. It's a weakness I never inherited. She aimed the gun at Evangeline. Any last words, sister dear? Yes. Evangeline straightened, meeting Cordelia's gaze without flinching. You lose. Cordelia frowned. What? The vault room suddenly filled with FBI agents, weapons drawn. Cordelia Ravencrest, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and embezzlement. Cordelia's face went white. How? Hidden camera, Caspian said, struggling to his feet with Evangeline's help. I installed it last week when I came here to review the evidence. Everything you just said was transmitted live to the FBI field office. Impossible. You've been wheelchair-bound for 2 years. Funny thing about recovery, Caspian said, his arm tightening around Evangeline's waist. It can be full of surprises. As the agents cuffed Cordelia, she turned to Evangeline with pure hatred in her eyes. You think this changes anything? You're still nothing but a bastard orphan. You'll never be good enough for him." "Maybe not," Evangeline said quietly, "but I'm good enough for me, and that's what matters." Cordelia was led away screaming threats and curses, but Evangeline barely heard her. All she could focus on was Caspian's warm hand in hers and the promise of a future where they didn't have to run or hide or look over their shoulders. "It's over," he said softly. "Is it?" She looked up at him, this man who had become her whole world. "What happens now?" "Now we heal. Together." He cupped her face in his hands. "If you'll have me." "Always," she whispered, and when he kissed her, it tasted like freedom. 6 months later, Evangeline stood on the terrace of the restored Ravencrest mansion, watching the sunset paint the Atlantic in shades of gold and crimson. The house had been transformed, no longer a prison of shadows and secrets, but a home filled with light and laughter. Caspian emerged from the French doors behind her, walking with barely a trace of his former limp. Physical therapy had worked miracles, but she knew the real healing had come from something deeper, the freedom to be himself again. "The lawyers called," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Cordelia's plea bargain was accepted. 25 to life, no possibility of parole. Evangeline leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Good. And Maximus?" 15 years for conspiracy and attempted murder. The other 2 took deals to testify against them. His lips found the sensitive spot behind her ear. "It's really over now." She turned in his arms, studying the face that had become as familiar to her as her own. The haunted look was gone from his dark eyes, replaced by something she'd never dared hope for during those first terrifying weeks: peace. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Caspian, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." He dropped to one knee on the terrace stones, and her breath caught in her throat. The ring box in his hands was simple, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious displays of wealth she'd grown accustomed to. "Evangeline Rose Whitmore, will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, classic and timeless. But it was the man offering it that made her heart race. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then stood and kissed her with a passion that still made her dizzy. Even after months together, the chemistry between them hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger as they learned to trust completely. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love your courage, your compassion, the way you see good in broken things. I love that you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. I love you too." She traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "You taught me what it means to fight for something worth having." They held each other as the last light faded from the sky, and Evangeline marveled at how much her life had changed. The scared, sheltered woman who'd arrived at this mansion was gone, replaced by someone stronger, braver, more sure of her own worth. "I found something else today," Caspian said. "Hidden in the library, just like your mother's letter said." He handed her a small, leather-bound Bible, her childhood Bible from the orphanage. Hidden in the binding, exactly as her mother had promised, were additional documents. Bank records, photographs, recorded conversations. Everything needed to trace the full extent of Cordelia's crimes and recover the stolen money. "Your mother was brilliant," Caspian said softly. "She made sure justice would eventually be served, even if she couldn't live to see it." Evangeline pressed the Bible to her chest, feeling closer to her mother than she had since childhood. "I wish she could have known you, could have seen that her sacrifice meant something." "I think she did know. Why else would she have trusted a 6-year-old boy to keep her secrets safe?" He smiled. "She was protecting you both, her daughter and the man who would someday love her." 3 months later, they married in the mansion's restored gardens. It was a small ceremony, just a few close friends, Mrs. Patterson, fully recovered and back to terrorizing the household staff, and the FBI agents who had become unlikely friends during the long investigation. Evangeline wore her mother's pearls and carried white roses from the garden Isadora had once tended. As she walked down the aisle toward Caspian, she felt her mother's presence like a benediction. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Evangeline barely heard the familiar words. All her attention was focused on the man waiting for her, the man who had taught her that love wasn't just about healing broken things, but about becoming whole together. When they kissed as husband and wife, The assembled guests cheered, but all Evangeline could hear was the sound of her own heart beating in perfect rhythm with his. Later, as they danced on the same terrace where their love had first bloomed, Caspian whispered in her ear, "No more running, no more hiding. Just us, for the rest of our lives." "Promise?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Promise," he said, and spun her around until she laughed with pure joy. The shadows of the past had finally been banished. In their place was something infinitely more powerful, a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever. Together, they had found their way home.